Do Yoon clapped his hands twice, and 23 small faces looked up at him. It was morning on May 7, and the sunlight came through the windows of the learning center in long golden strips across the floor. The children sat in a circle on a soft blue mat, and Do Yoon smiled at them the way he always did, like every single one of them was the most important person in the galaxy. "Good morning, little stars," he said. "Good morning, Teacher Yoon," they shouted back, not all at the same time, which made it sound like a happy mess of voices. Hana, a 6-year-old girl with a round face and paint on her fingers, stood up and walked to him. She held out a piece of paper. On it she had drawn 2 figures standing under a sky full of colored dots. One figure was tall, one was small. Underneath she had written in big wobbly letters, "Teacher and the Stars." Do Yoon took the drawing and pressed it against his chest. "This is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," he said, and he meant it, because he said it every time, and he meant it every time. The colony of Male 7 was not an important place. It sat on the edge of human space, a green and quiet world of farms, small towns, and learning centers. 14,000 people lived there. They grew rice and vegetables in wide fields. They taught their children. They watched the stars at night and felt lucky to be so far from the noise of the inner worlds. Nobody thought about war. Nobody thought about empires. The galaxy was large, and Male 7 was small, and that had always felt like a kind of safety. Ji-yoon came by the learning center just before lunch. She was the colony's doctor, a tall woman with tired eyes and a warm laugh. She leaned against the doorway and watched Do Yoon help a boy named Kiwoo tie his shoes. "You have more patience than any human alive," she said. "They are easy to be patient with." "I brought vitamins for the little ones," Ji-yoon said, holding up a small box, "and coffee for the big one." She set a cup on his desk. "You are a hero," Do Yoon said. Ji-yoon laughed. "I am a tired woman with a coffee machine. Do not promote me." That was the last normal conversation they ever had. At 14 minutes past noon, the sky broke open. There was no warning, no alarm, no message. One moment the sky was blue and clear, and the next it was full of ships, hundreds of them. They came through the upper atmosphere like dark teeth, biting through fabric, and the sound they made was so deep and so loud that every window in the learning center cracked at the same time. The children screamed. Do Yoon moved on instinct. He pulled the emergency hatch in the floor and began pushing children down into the shelter below. "Go, go, go," he said, keeping his voice steady, even though his hands were shaking. "Hold each other's hands. Do not let go." Across the colony, Taeho was already running. He was the captain of the colonial militia, which was not really an army at all. It was 200 volunteers with old rifles and not enough armor. But Taeho had served in the human navy once, and he knew what those ships were. The Ven Dominion. He had heard the stories. He had prayed they were exaggerations. They were not. Emperor Galactic watched from the command deck of his throne ship, a vessel so large it blocked the sun over the colony's main town. He stood with his arms folded behind his back, his silver eyes reflecting the holographic display of the world below. Beside him stood Commander Auric, loyal and silent as always. "Begin with the children's districts," Galactic said. His voice was calm. He said it the way someone might say, "Begin with the soup." Auric hesitated for just a moment, then relayed the order. Galactic had conquered 93 worlds. He had learned long ago that the fastest way to break a species was not to destroy their armies or their cities. It was to destroy what they loved most. And every species, no matter how different, loved their children most. Kill the children, and the adults lose their will. Kill enough children, and they lose their identity. It was not cruelty to Galactic. It was mathematics. It was strategy. The Ven ground forces hit the colony like a wave. Taeho and his militia fought at the edge of the main town, and they fought hard, but it was like throwing stones at a flood. The Ven soldiers were tall, armored, and precise. The militia lasted 40 minutes. Tejo died standing, firing his rifle until it melted in his hands. Ji-Yun heard the explosions and ran toward the learning center. She was not a soldier. She was not brave in the way soldiers are brave. But she was a doctor, and there were children, and that was enough. She reached the center, just as the Ven breached the east wall. She saw the small bodies. She saw the soldiers. She threw herself over a group of toddlers huddled in the corner, and covered them with her own body. She did not survive. Neither did the toddlers. Do-Yun was knocked unconscious when the ceiling collapsed. He fell beside the shelter hatch, buried under dust and broken wood. When he woke, he did not know how much time had passed. The air was gray and thick. There was no sound, no crying, no screaming, nothing. He crawled through the wreckage, calling names. He called for Ji-Yun. He called for Kiwoo. He called for Hana. He called, and nobody answered. On the throne ship, a Ven officer delivered the final report to Emperor Galactic. The colony was secured. Civilian casualties were high, as intended. And the number of children confirmed dead, across all districts of Mayul 7, was exactly 5,731. Galactic received the number with a small nod. He did not smile. He did not frown. He simply accepted it the way he accepted all numbers, as evidence of progress. He ordered the fleet to remain in orbit, so the galaxy could see what had happened. Let the humans look. Let them understand. Below, in the ruins of the learning center, Do-Yun found her. Hana was under a fallen beam, beneath Jae-Yoon's body. Jae-Yoon had shielded her in the last moment, and somehow, impossibly, the little girl was alive. She was covered in dust and blood that was not her own. Her eyes were wide open. In her small hand, she still held the crayon drawing, crumpled and torn. Do-Yun pulled her free and held her against his chest. She did not speak. She did not cry. She just held on to him with both arms, and he held on to her, and around them, the world was ash and silence. He looked up at the dark shape of the throne ship, blocking the sky, and he felt something he had never felt before. Not anger, not fear, a question with no answer, pressing against the inside of his chest like a second heartbeat. Why? 36 hours after the massacre, Emperor Galactic descended to the surface of Mayul 7. This was something he always did. After every conquest, after every world that fell beneath his fleet, he walked through the destruction himself. He called it the witnessing. He believed a ruler who gave orders to kill should have the courage to stand in the result. It was the one principle he held that looked almost like honor, though it was not honor at all. It was pride. The shuttle landed in what had once been the colony's central square. Now it was a flat gray space of broken stone and ash. The air smelled like burned metal and something else, something sweet and terrible that Galactic had smelled on many worlds before. Orak walked beside him, armored and alert, scanning the ruins with careful eyes. A squad of Ven guards followed at a distance. Galactic walked slowly. He looked at the collapsed buildings. He looked at the overturned vehicles. He looked at a child's shoe sitting alone in the middle of the road, and he did not pause because he had seen such things many times. On the world of Thesson, he had walked through a field of burning schools. On Auric 4, he had stood in a nursery where nothing moved. He had done this 93 times. He was familiar with what death looked like when it was given to the young. The humans are quiet, Auric said. They are always quiet after, Galactic replied. Every species is. And this was true. In Galactic's experience, every civilization responded to overwhelming loss in the same way. First, there was shock. Then silence. Then submission. It was a pattern as reliable as gravity. The strong act. The weak accept. This was the order of the universe as Galactic understood it. And 10,000 years of conquest had never shown him anything different. They walked through the remains of the Learning Center district. His boots left clean prints in the gray dust. He was tall, even for a Ven, and his presence was heavy in the way that old and powerful things are heavy. His silver eyes moved over everything without emotion. He was cataloging, recording, confirming that his orders had been followed. Then his guards found the man. Do-Yun was sitting in the wreckage of the Learning Center, on a piece of broken wall, with Hana asleep in his arms. He had not moved from this spot in hours. He had nowhere to go. The shelter beneath the building was full of bodies. The streets were full of Ven soldiers. So he sat, and he held the child, and he waited for whatever was going to happen next. He was covered in dust from head to foot. His clothes were torn. There was dried blood on his face and his hands, and none of it was his. His eyes were red and swollen from crying, but he was not crying now. He had reached the place beyond tears, where the body simply stops. Not because the grief is over, but because the body cannot hold any more of it. The Ven guards raised their weapons and barked an order. Do-Yun did not flinch. He looked up at them with an expression that none of them had expected. It was not fear. It was not hatred. It was calm. A terrible, empty calm, like the surface of deep water. Galak raised one hand, and the guards stepped back. The Emperor walked forward until he stood directly in front of the human. He looked down at Do-Yun and at the small girl sleeping in his arms. He studied them with the mild curiosity of someone examining an unusual rock. "You are a teacher," Galak said. His translator turned the words into sounds the human could understand. "I can tell by your clothing." Do-Yun said nothing. "Do you understand what has happened here?" Galak continued. "Your colony has been claimed. Your children are dead. Your species will learn from this. They will see what defiance costs. They will understand that the Ven Dominion does not make requests, it makes examples." Do-Yun looked at him. Just looked. His eyes were steady. Galak tilted his head. This was unusual. On most worlds, survivors at this stage either begged for their lives, cursed him in their native tongue, or stared at the ground in silent defeat. This human was doing none of those things. He was simply looking at Galak the way one might look at a math problem that refused to make sense. "Do you have something to say?" Galak asked. There was no threat in his voice. He was genuinely asking, the way a scientist might ask a specimen to perform. Do-Yun held Hana a little closer. He took a breath, and then he spoke. "Why?" One word, spoken in a normal voice, not shouted, not whispered, not broken by sobs or twisted by anger. The simplest question a teacher could ask, delivered with the full, honest weight of a man who truly, deeply, completely did not understand. The translator processed the word and delivered it to Galak in his own language. And the Emperor stopped. He did not move. He did not speak. His silver eyes stayed fixed on the human, and for a long moment the only sound was the wind moving through the ruins. Orek watched from behind, and he saw something he had never seen in all his centuries of service. He saw the Emperor go still, not the stillness of authority, not the stillness of power choosing when to strike, a different stillness, the stillness of something that had been hit in a place it did not know it had. Galak had been begged on 40 worlds. He had been cursed on 30 more. He had heard screams and prayers and threats in hundreds of languages. He had been called a monster, a demon, a god of death. None of it had touched him. He had an answer for all of it. The strong rule. The weak fall. This is the way of things. But no one had ever simply asked him why. No one had ever looked at him with calm, genuine confusion and asked the question as if they truly believed there must be an answer. Because surely no living being would do this without a reason. The word carried an assumption that shattered Gallic in a way no weapon ever had. It assumed that he was rational, that he had logic, that somewhere beneath the armor and the empire and the 10,000 years of blood there was a reason. And there was not. Gallic opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it again. He looked at the human, and the human looked back, and the question hung in the air between them, like something physical. Then Gallic turned away. He walked back toward the shuttle without a word. Auric followed, confused, watching the Emperor's back. The guards fell in line behind them. No one spoke. In the shuttle, Gallic sat in silence. Auric sat across from him and waited. He had served this Emperor for 300 years. He had seen him burn worlds without blinking. He had never seen him like this. "My lord," Auric said carefully, "your orders for the next phase?" Gallic stared at the wall. His hands, Auric noticed, were trembling. Not much, just slightly. A tremor in the fingers that had signed the deaths of millions. The distress signal from Male 7 reached the human flagship Resolve 11 hours after the massacre. It arrived broken and full of static, a patchwork of screams and automated emergency codes stitched together by a failing transmitter. Bora, the intelligence officer on the night watch, was the first to hear it. She sat in her chair in the signals room, headphones pressed to her ears, and she listened to the whole thing without moving. When it was over, she pulled up the colony's registry and cross-referenced the casualty data embedded in the final automated broadcast. She read the number 3 times. Then, she walked to Admiral Mireille's quarters and knocked on the door. Mireille opened it in her undershirt, her hair loose, her face creased with sleep. She saw Bora's expression, and the sleep vanished from her eyes immediately. "What happened?" Mireille asked. "Male 7, Bora said. "The Ven Dominion. Full assault, no warning." She paused, and her voice changed, becoming flat in the way that voices become flat when they are holding something terrible in place. 5,731 children confirmed dead. They targeted the children first. It was deliberate. Mireille did not speak for a long time. She stood in her doorway, with one hand on the frame and the other hanging at her side. And she breathed in, and she breathed out. And she let the number land inside her. Then she said, "Wake everyone." Within an hour, every person on the Resolve knew. Within 6 hours, every human world knew. The news moved across the communication networks at the speed of light, and wherever it arrived, it did the same thing. It hit people like a wall. Parents held their children tighter. Teachers closed their classroom doors and wept. Old soldiers, who had not cried in decades, sat alone in dark rooms and let the tears come. And then something happened that the Ven Dominion had not predicted. Something that Emperor Gallic, in all his 10,000 years of conquest, had never seen. Humanity did not break. On every colony, every station, every city on every world, the grief turned into something else. It did not become panic. It did not become despair. It became a cold, clear, quiet fury that moved through the entire species like an electrical current. Recruitment offices were flooded with volunteers by the second day. Scientists abandoned civilian research to work on weapons technology. Factory worlds retooled their production lines. Retired Navy officers sent messages to their former commanders that all said the same thing in different words. "I am ready. Tell me where to go." The Ven had expected submission. They received unity. On the Resolve, Mireille gathered her senior officers in the war room. She was a small woman with short gray hair and dark, steady eyes, and she spoke quietly, which made people listen harder. "I am not going to give you a speech about vengeance," she said. "Vengeance is what the Ven understand. We are going to give them something they do not understand. We are going to show them what happens when you attack a species that protects its young. Not because we are angry, though we are angry, but because every civilization in this galaxy needs to know that there is a cost, and the cost is everything we have. 3 systems away, on the Ven flagship, Emperor Galactic was falling apart. He sat in his private chamber, surrounded by holographic displays that showed the tactical situation across 3 sectors, and he looked at none of them. Instead, he was watching a recording. His neural implant had captured the moment on the surface of Male 7 in perfect detail, and he was replaying it over and over. The teacher sitting in the rubble, the child in his arms, the calm red eyes, the single word. He had watched it 412 times. Orek stood outside the Emperor's chamber and listened to the silence. In 300 years, he had never known Galactic to lock himself away like this. The Emperor was a creature of action and certainty. He gave orders. He moved forward. He did not sit in the dark and replay memories. Something had changed, and Orek could feel it the way an animal feels a change in the weather, a pressure in the air that meant a storm was coming. Galactic had begun doing something he had never done before. He was looking back. He pulled up the records of his past conquests, one by one, and for the first time, he did not read them as victories. He read the numbers. Not the territories gained, or the resources claimed. The other numbers. The small ones. The ones that told you how many had died, and how old they were. On Thesson, he had killed 11,000 children. On Auric 4, 800. On the water world of Pelune, 3,000. Most of them drowned when his fleet boiled the oceans. He had never counted before. He had never had a reason to count. Now he could not stop. On the ruined surface of Mayul 7, a boy named Suho was walking through the wreckage of the Northern District. He was 15 years old. He had survived because he had been in the underground water tunnels when the attack came, checking the irrigation pumps for his parents. His parents had not survived. He had found their bodies in the field behind their house, still holding each other. Suho was not crying. He had cried until his body refused to produce any more tears. And now he moved through the ruins with a dry face and burning eyes, looking for something useful. He found it. In the basement of the communications building. A long-range relay transmitter, damaged but functional. He sat down in front of it, powered it up, and began to broadcast. He did not ask for help. He did not beg for rescue. Instead, he began to read names. Kiwoo, age 7, he said into the microphone. Yuna, age 5. Jisoo, age 8. Minho, age 4. He read every name he could remember. Classmates, neighbors' children, kids he had seen playing in the fields. He spoke their names clearly and carefully, one by one, and he did not stop. He broadcast on an open channel, which meant anyone could hear it. Human ships heard it. Ven ships heard it. On the Ven destroyer Ironfang, a young soldier named Drell was monitoring communications when Suho's broadcast came through. He listened for a few minutes, not understanding the words, but understanding the tone. He asked his translator to process it. When the names began appearing on his screen, each one followed by an age, he stared at them for a long time. Then he turned off the feed and sat in silence. He was not the only one. Across the Ven fleet, the broadcast reached soldiers and officers who had followed orders without question. Some turned it off immediately. Some listened for a moment and moved on. But some listened to the whole thing. Some heard the voice of a 15-year-old boy reading the names of dead children for hours without stopping, and something inside them shifted. Just a little. Just enough. Auric heard the broadcast too. He stood on the bridge of the flagship and listened to the human boy's voice coming through the speakers, name after name after name. And he looked out the viewport at the scarred world below, and he thought about the Emperor sitting alone in the dark, watching the same moment over and over. And he made a decision. He did not make it loudly. He did not announce it. He simply opened a private channel to 3 other Ven commanders he trusted and sent them a short message. We need to talk. On the Resolve, Admiral Mireille stood on the bridge and looked out at the stars. Behind her, Her crew worked with a focused intensity she had never seen before. There was no chatter, no complaints. Every station was manned, every system was ready. The fleet was assembling faster than anyone had thought possible. Ships arriving from every corner of human space, civilian transports converted into supply carriers, mining vessels refitted with weapons. Mireille turned to face her crew. She did not raise her voice. "The Ven Emperor believes he understands us," she said. "He believes that if you hurt a species badly enough, it will stop fighting. He is wrong. He killed our children, and he expected us to kneel." She paused. "We do not kneel, we remember, and then we come." She gave the order. Every ship humanity had, moving together toward Male 7, and the stars themselves seemed to make way. The human fleet arrived in the Male system on a Tuesday, and it filled the sky like a second night. The Ven sensor officers saw them first. One moment, the long-range displays showed empty space, and the next, they were full of contacts. Hundreds of them, then thousands. Ships of every class and every age, from modern battle cruisers to refitted cargo haulers with missile racks welded onto their hulls. They came out of faster-than-light travel in a single coordinated wave, and they kept coming, and they kept coming, and the Ven officers watched their displays with a growing feeling that they had made a very serious mistake. On the Ven flagship, Commander Auric stared at the tactical hologram and felt his stomach drop. Ven intelligence had estimated that it would take humanity at least 2 years to assemble a fleet of this size. It had taken them 3 weeks. "How?" he said to the officer beside him. The officer shook his head. "They came from everywhere, Commander. Every colony, every station, every shipyard. Civilian vessels, military vessels, even ships that were supposed to be decommissioned. They all came." Auric understood then, in a way he had not understood before, what the Emperor had done. He had not just attacked a colony. He had not just killed children. He had given an entire species a single, shared reason to fight, and that species had responded with everything it had. He went to Galac's chamber. The door was sealed, as it had been for days. He pressed the communicator. "My lord, the human fleet has arrived. We need your orders." A long silence. Then Galac's voice, thin and distant. "How many?" "More than we expected. Far more." Another silence. "Engage them." Auric hesitated. "My lord, our tactical position is not favorable. If we reposition to the—" "Engage them, Auric." The Battle of Meul began at 1100 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The Ven fleet was disciplined, experienced, and well-armed. They had won battles across 100 systems, and had never faced an enemy they could not defeat. They formed their standard combat formation, a crescent of heavy warships with fighter screens on both flanks, and they advanced toward the human fleet with the confidence of 10,000 years of victory behind them. The humans did not form a standard formation. They formed a wall. Every ship, from the largest battle cruiser to the smallest armed transport, lined up side by side in a single massive front, and they moved forward together. No clever tactics. No flanking maneuvers. Just a wall of metal and fire moving straight at the Ven fleet, with a simplicity that was almost insulting. Admiral Mireille stood on the bridge of the Resolve and watched the distance between the two fleets shrink. Bora was at the communication station, monitoring every channel. The bridge was silent except for the hum of the engines and the quiet voices of officers reporting status. "All ships report ready," Bora said. Mireille nodded. She opened a fleet-wide channel. "This is Admiral Mireille. You all know why we are here. You all know what was taken from us. I will not ask you to be brave, because you already are. I will only ask you to remember their names." She paused. "All ships, weapons free." The wall of human ships opened fire at the same moment, and the void between the two fleets turned white. The Ven had fought many species. They had fought the insectoid thrall, who attacked in mindless swarms. They had fought the crystalline Pelori, who shattered under sustained fire. They had fought races that were stronger, faster, and more numerous, but they had never fought anything like this. The humans took losses immediately. The Ven weapons were powerful and accurate, and human ships began to break apart in the first minutes of the battle. But the fleet did not slow down. It did not retreat. It did not scatter. Every time a ship was destroyed, the ships beside it closed the gap and kept firing. They absorbed the losses and moved forward, and the rate of their fire did not decrease. It increased. On the Ven destroyer Ironfang, the young soldier Drell watched a human transport ship, a civilian vessel barely armed, fly directly into the path of a torpedo meant for the battlecruiser behind it. The transport vanished in a ball of light, and the battlecruiser behind it fired a full volley into the Ven cruiser that had launched the torpedo. The cruiser's shields failed, and it split in half. Drell stared at his display. The humans were not just fighting. They were protecting each other with their bodies. They were trading their lives for each other, without hesitation, without orders, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On the flagship, Galactic sat on his throne and watched the battle through the main display. Oryx stood beside him, calling out tactical updates, requesting orders, trying to coordinate a defense that was falling apart. The Ven fleet was being pushed back. The crescent formation was bending. Human ships were punching through the flanks and hitting the rear line. "My lord," Oryx said urgently, "we need to reposition the third wing. If we pull them back too—" "Why did I do it?" Galactic said. Oryx stopped. "My lord." Galactic was not looking at the battle. He was looking at his own hands. "Why did I order it?" "My lord, this is not the time." "I have always had an answer," Galactic said, and his voice sounded like something that was cracking from the inside. "The strong rule, the weak submit. That was the answer. That was always the answer. But it is not an answer. It is just words. I dressed up the absence of reason in the language of philosophy, and I believed it because no one ever asked me to explain." He looked up at Oryx. "A teacher asked me why, and I had nothing to say. A man who teaches children to read asked me to justify myself, and I could not." A Ven cruiser exploded on the display behind him. Oryx flinched. Galactic did not. "Give me your orders," Oryx said, almost pleading now. The machine that had driven him for 10,000 years, the certainty, the ideology, the cold logic of dominance, had a crack in it now, and the crack was shaped like a single word, and everything was leaking out through it. Oryx made his choice. He stepped away from the throne and opened a secure channel. The encryption was military-grade and personal. It reached the resolve in seconds. Admiral Miray's voice came through, sharp and controlled. "This is the resolve. Identify yourself." "I am Commander Oryx of the Ven Dominion," he said. "I am offering a ceasefire. Not on the Emperor's authority, on my own." A pause. "Why should I believe you?" Oryx looked back at Galactic, who was still staring at his hands. "Your teacher broke something in him," he said quietly. "I do not know if what is left is enough to make peace. But the war he started, I will not finish for him." There was a long silence on the channel. Then Miray said, "Hold your position. All Ven ships hold fire, and we hold fire. Any ship that fires will be destroyed." Oryx gave the order. The Ven fleet stopped firing. The human fleet stopped firing. The silence after a battle is a strange and heavy thing, full of the echoes of everything that just happened. On the surface of Maol 7, Do-Yun stood outside the ruins of the learning center, with Hana in his arms, and watched the sky. He had seen the flashes of light, the brief bright stars that were ships dying. He had watched his own people fight and die in the darkness above him. Hana pressed her face against his shoulder. "Teacher," she whispered, "is it stopping?" Do-Yun watched the sky go dark and quiet. "I think so," he said. Then across every open channel in the system, a transmission came from the Ven flagship. It was short. It contained no words, no threats, no demands. It contained only a number. 5731. Not as an apology, because he did not know how to apologize. Not as a justification, because he had none. He sent it as the only honest thing he had left. An acknowledgement that the number was real, and that it mattered, and that he could not pretend it did not. The Ven fleet turned and began its retreat. Galek sat on his throne in silence, and the stars he had once conquered without thought now seemed very far away and very cold. 6 months passed, and the galaxy changed. On Mayul 7, where the ash had settled and the first green things were beginning to push up through the scorched earth, they built a memorial. It was not large or grand. It was a wall of white stone, curved gently like an open hand, standing in the field where the learning center had been. On the wall, carved in clean letters, were 5,731 names. Each name was followed by an age. Some of the ages were very small numbers. Some were just the number 2. Do Yoon visited the wall every morning. He came just after sunrise, when the light was soft and the stone was warm, and he brought Hana with him. She was speaking again now. It had taken 3 months. For the first 12 weeks after the massacre, she had not said a single word, and Do Yoon had not pushed her. He had simply been there, every day, holding her hand, reading her stories, making her meals, waiting with the patience of a man whose whole life had been built on the belief that children bloom when they are ready. One morning, she had looked up at him and said, "Teacher, can I have juice?" And Do Yoon had gone to the kitchen and poured her a glass and set it in front of her, and then he had turned away so she would not see him cry. Now she walked beside him to the wall each morning and looked up at all the names. She could not read most of them yet, but she was learning. "Who are they?" she asked one day. "Your friends," Do Yoon said. "We say their names so they are not forgotten." Hana looked at the wall for a long time. Then she said, "That is a lot of friends." "Yes," Do Yoon said, "it is." Across the galaxy, the Ven Dominion was breaking. Emperor Galek had abdicated the throne 3 months after the retreat from Mayul. He had done it without ceremony, without explanation. He had simply walked out of the throne room and not come back. The Dominion, which had held together for 10,000 years through his will and his certainty, began to crack the moment that certainty disappeared. Commander Oryx stepped into the gap. He was not a ruler by nature, and he did not want to be one, but someone had to hold things together, and he was the only one the factions would listen to. The reformists wanted change. The traditionalists wanted to find a new emperor and continue as before. Oryx held them apart through sheer stubbornness and a willingness to speak plainly. "The old way is dead," he told them. "It died on a colony world when a teacher asked a question our emperor could not answer. We can build something new, or we can fight each other over the bones of something that is gone. I know which one I prefer." It was ugly and difficult and full of arguments that sometimes turned into violence. But it was happening, and that was more than anyone had expected. Galek himself had disappeared to a barren world at the edge of Ven space, a rocky planet with no atmosphere and no life, where he lived alone in a sealed habitat and spoke to no one. He had taken nothing with him except his neural implant, and every day he replayed the same moment. The teacher, the child, the word. He was not experiencing guilt in the way that humans understood it. The Ven did not process emotion the same way. What Galek felt was closer to a structural failure. His entire identity, his entire understanding of reality, had been built on a framework of certainty. The strong rule, the weak fall. This is the natural order. The teacher's question had not attacked that framework. It had simply revealed that it was empty. There was nothing inside it. And now, Galek sat alone on a dead world, and tried to understand who he was, without the one idea that had defined him, and he could not. In human space, Admiral Mire oversaw the creation of what the military called the Ma'el Doctrine, though most people just called it the Promise. Its language was simple, and its meaning was clear. Humanity would never strike first. It would never attack civilians. It would never target children. But any species, any empire, any force in the galaxy that harmed human children would face the full power of every ship, every soldier, and every resource that humanity could bring to bear. There would be no negotiation. There would be no proportional response. There would be everything. The promise was broadcast on every galactic communication channel. Every spacefaring civilization received it. The Peluri read it, and increased their diplomatic ties with humanity. The Thrall received it, and withdrew their scouts from human border space. Even the Dominion's reformist faction acknowledged it with a formal response that came as close to respect as Ven language allowed. On a human naval base orbiting the colony world of Dejan, a young man named Suho stood in line with 200 other recruits on the first day of officer training. He was 17 now. He was taller than he had been, and thinner, and there was something in his eyes that made the other recruits look away. Not fear, not anger, just a depth that most teenagers did not have. He carried a datapad with him everywhere. On it was a file containing 5,731 names. He had compiled it himself, working from colony records, school registries, and his own memory. Every name had an age beside it. Some of the names had small notes. Liked drawing, always laughed, was afraid of insects, wanted to be a pilot. His instructors noticed that Suho never lost his temper. He never shouted. He never fought with emotion. He trained with a focus so intense it was almost frightening. And when his combat instructor asked him why he had enlisted, he answered without hesitation. So that no one ever has to read a list of names like the one I carry. The instructor looked at him for a long moment and then nodded and never asked again. 6 months and 4 days after the massacre, an unmarked Ven shuttle entered the mail system. It passed through the human patrol network without incident, because it was broadcasting a diplomatic code that Auric had provided. It landed on the surface of Mail 7, in a field half a kilometer from the memorial wall, and a single figure stepped out. Gallic looked nothing like an emperor. He was gaunt. His silver eyes were dull. He wore no armor, no insignia, no marks of rank. He looked like what he was, an old being who had carried something too heavy for too long, and had finally been crushed by it. He walked to the memorial wall. He stood before it and looked at the names. He read them one by one, slowly, sounding out the human letters through his translator. Each name was a small, bright thing, a life that had barely started, and each one pressed against him with a weight that no throne and no empire had ever made him feel. He was still standing there when Do-hoon arrived. The teacher came over the hill with Hana at his side, carrying a bundle of wildflowers they had picked from the edge of the new growth. He saw the alien standing before the wall, and he stopped. He recognized him instantly. He would never forget that face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Do-hoon walked forward. He set the flowers at the base of the wall, in the same spot he always placed them. Hana stayed close to his leg, looking up at the tall alien with wide, curious eyes. She had never seen a Ven before. Gallic turned to face Do-hoon. The translator hummed between them. "You asked me why," Gallic said. His voice was rough, unused. "I have spent 6 months searching for the answer." Do-yoon looked at him. He did not speak. He waited the way a good teacher waits for a student to find the words. "There is no answer," Gallic said. "There was never a reason. I told myself there was. I told myself it was strategy, that it was the natural order, that the strong must rule and the weak must learn their place. But those were just words I used to fill a hole where a reason should have been." He looked at the wall of names behind him. I killed 5,731 children, and there was no reason. That is the most terrible thing I have learned. The wind moved across the field. The wildflowers shifted at the base of the wall. Somewhere far away, a bird was singing, because life had returned to Male 7, whether anyone had invited it or not. Do-yun looked at Galek for a long time. He looked at the being who had ordered the death of his students, his friends, his world. He looked at the hands that had signed that order, and the eyes that had watched it happen. And then he nodded slowly. That is the first true thing you have ever said. They stood in silence for a while, two beings from different worlds standing before a wall of names, and neither of them tried to make the silence comfortable, because it was not a comfortable silence, and it was not supposed to be. Then Hana tugged on Do-yun's sleeve. "Teacher," she said. She was holding up a piece of paper. She had drawn it that morning, sitting at the small table in their temporary housing, using the new crayons that a supply ship had brought last week. The drawing showed a tall figure and a small figure standing side by side under a sky full of colored dots. It was almost exactly like the drawing she had made before the attack, the one that had been crumpled and stained with blood and was now pressed flat and kept in a frame beside Do-yun's bed. Hana looked up at Galek. She did not know who he was. She did not know what he had done. She saw only a tall, sad being standing alone in front of a wall. And she was 6 years old, and 6-year-olds do not like it when people are sad. She held the drawing up toward him. Galek looked down at the small human girl offering him a crayon picture, and something happened to his face that Orek would not have recognized, and that Galek himself did not have a name for. His silver eyes moved from the drawing to the girl, to the teacher, to the wall of 5,731 names, and for the first time in his ancient and terrible life, the Emperor of the Ven Dominion did not know what he was. He took the drawing. He held it carefully, the way one holds something impossibly fragile, and he looked at it, and he could not speak. Do-yun took Hana's hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let us go home." They walked away across the field, the teacher and the girl, toward the small cluster of temporary buildings where the survivors of Mayul 7 were rebuilding their lives. The sun was warm. The grass was new and bright. Hana swung Do-yun's hand and hummed a song that he had taught her, one of the songs from the learning center, from before. Behind them, Galek stood alone before the wall of names, holding a child's crayon drawing in hands that had destroyed worlds. He stood there for a very long time, reading the names, one by one, as the sun moved across the sky and the shadows grew long. He had come looking for something. Forgiveness, perhaps, or punishment, or understanding. He had not found any of these things. He had found something worse. He had found a 6-year-old girl who did not know what he was, offering him a picture of two people standing under the stars, and that small act of innocent kindness was heavier than anything he had ever carried. The galaxy learned many lessons from Mayul 7. The Ven learned that terror is not strategy. The stars learned that humanity does not break. Alien empires learned that there are lines you do not cross, and that the species on the far side of those lines will make you pay for crossing them with a unity and a fury that no amount of military intelligence can predict. But the most important lesson was the simplest one. A teacher held a child in the ruins of a school and asked a single word, and an empire that had no answer fell apart. Not because the word was a weapon, not because it was clever or sharp or designed to wound, but because it was honest. It was the most honest question anyone had ever asked. And honesty, it turns out, is the one thing that empires built on lies cannot survive.